Hey everyone, and welcome to RUBIN'S Mind Lab, where we break down the latest research into what it really means. Ever wonder why sometimes when you are feeling alone, everything seems a bit off, maybe even a little scary? Well, this new study is diving deep into the connection between being isolated and our risk for experiencing psychosis, which are basically those moments where our grip on reality can feel a bit shaky. So, the big question here is, how does being alone mess with our minds enough to potentially increase the risk for psychosis? Scientists have seen this connection for a long time, but the why has been a bit of a mystery. This paper dives into two main ideas to explain it. The first idea is the social needs framework. Think about it like this. We're wired to connect with people. It is a fundamental human need like food or water. When we're isolated, this need isn't met. So our brains might try to compensate by ramping up our attention to social cues, making us see social meaning where there might not be any, or overthinking social interactions. It's like our brain is trying really hard to fill that empty social space with anything that feels like connection, even if it is just in our heads. The second idea is the social processing framework. This one says that our minds are social because our environment is so full of social stuff. We're constantly processing what other people are doing and thinking. When we're isolated, there is less social input. This framework suggests that without that external social stimulation, our social thinking might actually decrease. Instead, our attention might turn inward, blurring the lines between our thoughts and what is happening in the real world, leading to a more intense focus on ourselves. This could cause, disturbances in how we monitor reality and strange self-experiences. So the researchers looked at a ton of studies that already showed this link between being isolated and psychosis. They wanted to see which of these two frameworks better explain how this happened. First, they pointed out that social isolation isn't just one thing. There is objective isolation, which is literally being alone, and subjective isolation, which is feeling lonely even if you are around people. And importantly, isolation can be voluntary, like choosing to be alone for a bit, or involuntary, like being forced into solitude. This distinction might be key. They also noted that feeling lonely, even if you have lots of people around, can be a big driver. It's about the quality of your connections, not just the quantity. The evidence linking isolation to psychosis is pretty strong. They found tons of studies showing that people who are more isolated, either objectively or subjectively, have a higher chance of experiencing psychotic symptoms or developing a psychotic disorder. Now, here is a tricky part. People with psychosis often struggle with social skills. So, is it that their social struggles cause them to become isolated, or does isolation cause the social struggles and potentially psychosis? The researchers looked at studies that established a timeline, and the evidence strongly suggests that social isolation comes first. Studies that follow people over time show that being isolated predicts later psychosis symptoms, but not the other way around. This is super important because it helps prove that isolation can cause these issues. The effect sizes they talked about were pretty big, meaning the link between isolation and psychosis risk is significant. Some studies found that being socially withdrawn before developing psychosis was extremely common. It's not a small effect, it's a really substantial one. So back to those two frameworks, social needs and social processing. The social needs framework suggests that when our need for connection is unmet, our brain works overtime to find social information, potentially leading to seeing social meaning where it isn't there, and hearing voices or having paranoid thoughts that are social in nature. Delusions of persecution, for example, are intensely social. The social processing framework, on the other hand, predicts that with less social input, our social thinking might actually decline. This could mean we become less attuned to social cues, and our thoughts might turn inward. This might lead to more non-social psychotic experiences, or a general difficulty in distinguishing between our inner thoughts and external reality. Think about this. If you're desperately craving social connection, social needs, your brain might interpret innocent glances as suspicious, or everyday sounds as voices talking about you. It is trying to fulfill that unmet need. If you're simply not exposed to much social interaction, social processing, your brain might get out of practice with social cues, leading to a general confusion or a tendency to overfocus on your own internal world, where things can get a bit strange. The really interesting part is that the researchers suggest both frameworks might be right, but for different people or in different situations. It's not necessarily an either-or. For example, involuntary isolation, where you desperately want to connect but can't, might trigger that hyperactive social seeking of the social needs framework. But if you choose to be alone and aren't craving deep connection, the social processing framework might be more relevant, leading to less social thought overall. They also bring up individual differences. People who naturally prefer solitude or those with social anhedonia. That's a reduced enjoyment of social interaction might be more prone to the effects of the social processing framework. Their already lower social drive means less social input, might just turn their focus inward. On the other hand, someone who thrives on social connection and is suddenly isolated might experience the world through the lens of the social needs framework, becoming hypervigilant and seeing social threats everywhere. Culture plays a role too. In cultures that highly value interdependence, isolation might be felt more intensely, potentially leaning towards the social needs framework. The way psychotic symptoms themselves show up can also be influenced by culture, meaning the content of hallucinations or delusions might differ. So, what does this mean for real life? If isolation is contributing to psychosis risk, then reducing isolation seems like a good idea, right? But it's not that simple. The paper points out that just increasing social contact doesn't always work, especially for people with existing mental health challenges. Sometimes people have social skill deficits or ingrained biases that make it hard to form good connections, even if they're more around people. Instead of just throwing more social interaction at the problem, the really promising direction might be to address the underlying psychological factors that make social connection difficult, or that are exacerbated by isolation. Things like social anxiety, how we interpret social situations, or even self-stigma can be targeted with therapies like cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT. If someone's experiences lean towards the social needs framework, lots of paranoid or persecutory thoughts interventions could focus on helping them to temper those social interpretations and see things from different perspectives. And if the experiences align more with social processing like general confusion or turning inward, there might be a need for interventions that encourage active social engagement and help rebuild those social processing muscles. This research gives us a much clearer picture of the complex relationship between being alone and our mental health. It's not just about being lonely, it's about how our brains fundamentally work to seek connection or process social information. Understanding these dynamics, the social needs framework and the social processing framework, could be a game changer for preventing psychosis. It suggests that tailored interventions focusing on the specific way isolation affects an individual are key, ultimately shining a spotlight on the impact of social isolation and continuing to research how it affects our minds is crucial. If you found this interesting, please give this video a thumbs up, leave a comment with your thoughts, and subscribe to RUBIN'S Mind Lab for more science breakdowns. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.